Hi folks, Paul Roberts here. What I'd like to do today is cover a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that's fishing rods. I love my fishing rods. I'm going to go at this in terms of function, what the jobs are a rod must perform, and what characteristics make up rod performance in these areas. It's not the price tag or the brand that are most important in evaluating rods. There are lots of good rods out there across brands and price ranges. First, let's get talking the same language. There are three main parameters that are used to describe fishing rods, and they're labeled on just about every rod on the rack, although not always by the same standard or even sometimes very accurately. That said, they are power, which is most simply the weight a given rod can support; taper or action, as it's most commonly called, which is how that power is distributed over the length of the rod; and length, how long the rod is. All three, along with the material the rod's made of, combine to create the functional characteristics of any given fishing rod. All fishing rods, at least for casting and retrieving artificial lures, must accomplish four things: casting with appropriate distance and accuracy; presentation, that is manipulating the lure; detection, that's telegraphing the presence of unseen objects beneath the water to us; and finally, for fighting fish. Different fishing scenarios bring a different mix of challenges in terms of these four jobs. No one rod design is optimal for all fishing situations. This is why experienced anglers, even those that may pursue only one species of fish, and even the most disciplined and frugal among us, end up owning a number of rods. In casting, the taper acts as a spring that propels the lure toward its target, hopefully with an appropriate amount of distance and accuracy. Taper or action is most often designated in terms of speed, fast to slow. This may seem odd. Why would that be? This refers to how quickly the rod taper or spring responds to the force that's applied to it. A fast rod responds quickly, while a slow rod responds more slowly, taking longer to gain or release a given load. In the faster rod, the tip travels a shorter distance to gain and release that load. In the slower rod, the tip has to travel a longer distance, given the same load. When casting, the lure goes where the rod tip sends it. And a fast rod with its shorter taper builds and releases its power much more quickly. This makes the timing of when you release that spring more critical. A slower rod is more forgiving in terms of that timing. Where very precise accuracy or real distance is required, a fast rod can make things more challenging. Slower rods tend to make accuracy and distance easier for just about everyone. Length plays a role too, with longer rods tending to excel in distance, while shorter rods excel in accuracy. This has to do with the physical distance between the rod tip and your eye. The closer to the eye, the easier it is to be accurate. Now, none of this means that one cannot adapt to almost any given rod. One can learn to cast almost any rod with some semblance of distance and accuracy. But some things inherent in the design, most notably length and taper, can help in these areas. Fighting fish also makes use of power, taper, and length. More power allows more pressure on the fish, and taper affects how quickly quick movements by the fish can be absorbed. So you're going to do it again. Slower rods are able to absorb shock more smoothly and evenly, as they gain and release the load more gently. Faster rods load and unload more quickly, requiring faster reflexes from the angler to count the resulting shock from the fish that could tear loose a hook or part the line. Length comes into play in terms of the mechanical advantage that longer levers, rods in this case, provide. With a long rod, small movement at the handle end, by your hand, multiplies corresponding tip movement. This is at work at both ends of the stick. In fact, a fish seems to fight harder on a longer rod, or at least you feel more movement at the rod handle with a long rod. This mechanical advantage also affects the detection sensitivity of the rod as well. A longer rod has the inherent ability to magnify rod handle movement caused by something down there under the water. However, this advantage is not going to be realized if that particular rod is a heavy, rubbery club. And it's easier to wind up with a heavy club of a rod the longer the rod is. And I'll come back to this in a bit. Now, it may seem that I'm just singing the praises of slower action rods. Why then are fast tapered rods so popular amongst anglers? It's because faster rods tend to, but not always, and I'll get to this, faster rods tend to excel at the remaining two jobs, presentation and detection. What I would argue are the most important and certainly the most challenging jobs a fishing rod must perform. Presentation is the manipulation of lures, and the presentation method you want to use is greatly affected by the rod's power and action. Presentations that require quick, responsive manipulations of a lure, such as jerk baits, blade baits, inline spinners, since we have to engage them, some topwaters, and crankbaits and vegetation are often all best handled with rods on the stiffer, faster end of the spectrum. Slow or weak rods can hamper the quick reaction time needed for many lure presentations and for hook setting. In general, softer rods, especially those with much tip bounce, not only help by absorbing shock, say when you're fighting a fish, but they also work against you because they absorb the vibrations that come from down below, hampering your detection sensitivity or feel. Now, when I talk about vibrations, I'm not referring to some mysterious vibes that only Zen masters can tap into. The vibrations that are transmitted up the rod to your hand are actually much more mundane than that. They are quite simply rod movement. If an event at the lure does not move the rod, you can't detect it. I'm no longer a believer in the significance of your hand or fingers being in contact with the blank. We're not talking magic vibrations here. They don't exist, as far as your rod hand is concerned. So detection actually works this way. We're connected to our lure via a real chain of molecules: lure, line, rod, hand. That's it. A disturbance at the lure must move, put tension on the line. That tension pulls on the rod tip, which in turn moves the rod in your hand. No magic vibes, just plain movement. So in terms of sensitivity, what's most important in a good fishing rod are three things: its weight, its rigidity, and, at least to a lesser extent, the rod's balance in your hand. The only way to gain more sensitivity is to bypass the rod altogether and pinch the line between your fingers so that you can feel the movement, tension in the line, rather than waiting for it to reach sufficient tension to move the rod. Lures that require more sensitivity to detect strikes are often best served with rigid, faster rod actions. An exception can be, say, when you're using soft plastic techniques such as drop shotting, Ned rigging, and light-weighted worming, in which the fish may take subtly and then hold that soft, lightly weighted bait for some time. A softer tip may allow you to weigh the line, that is, add tension gently to feel the weight or actions of the fish. However, if the fish are apt to take and eject a lure more quickly, as has been my experience with jigs, a faster action rod provides you a quicker and more powerful reaction. It's possible to have a slower action rod that is highly sensitive and even highly responsive. That would be a rod with a lot of power to provide the necessary rigidity, but evenly distributed, thus a slow action. To keep weight down, such a design would require high quality, what's called high modulus materials. That is, rigid materials that offer a quick recovery to straight after a load is quickly released, without lots of overshoot or bounce, tip bounce. To gain such performance, high quality lightweight material is required to keep weight down. Such high quality, high modulus materials tend to be expensive and comparatively brittle or more easily broken. However, new manufacturing technologies are chipping away at this issue with ever-increasing success, and as happens with new technologies, as they're introduced, good materials tend to trickle down into the lower price brackets of the rod rack. Lower quality, lower modulus materials, while more durable, must be built up to achieve the necessary rigidity. The rod then becomes heavy, feeling more club-like in hand and hampering detection capability. So here's a tip for you on balancing material quality, costs versus performance. Rod length matters here. With long rods, say over 6.5 feet in length, high quality materials are of greater importance. When talking lower modulus, more rubbery materials, the longer the rod becomes, the heavier it becomes. So my advice here is be willing to put more money into long rods than the short ones. Okay, I hope this helps you better understand fishing rods. And you're now better equipped to explain to your significant other why you're coming home with another fishing rod. Why do you need so many fishing rods?